Welcome to the programme. It's the worst violence since Kosovo declared independence. NATO and UN forces have come under attack in the divided town of Mitrovica as they cleared demonstrating Kosovan Serbs from a UN courthouse. The UN has now ordered police to pull out after they were faced with grenades, firecrackers and guns. Tim Friend reports.
This is the most serious violence in Kosovo since it declared unilateral independence in February. More than 20 UN police have been injured and 8 NATO peacekeepers. Tension had been rising in Mitrovica for several days, and police have now been forced to withdraw from the Serbian half of this divided town. Police and peacekeepers moved in to regain control of the UN-administered courthouse. Serbs had occupied the building since Friday, demanding their old jobs back and in protest against Kosovo independence. But they were attacked with grenades and gunfire. There was at least one big explosion. At least 22 of the wounded UN police were Polish, pelted with rocks and unable to return to their armoured vehicles. 53 Serbs were arrested, but some escaped in the chaos. The Serbian President, Boris Tadic, called for restraint by the police. 70 Serb demonstrators were injured.
Right now we have a violent riot on our hands. Some unmanned police officers and KFOR soldiers have been wounded, and right now KFOR is trying to restore law and order. There has been some use by the protesters, by the mob, basically, of possibly hand grenades, Molotov cocktails, not to mention stones and firecrackers, so it's still a very fluid situation.
A group of 300 Serbs stormed the UN-run courthouse on Friday. Negotiations failed over the weekend. Kosovo's independence has been recognized by many Western countries, but Serbia and Kosovo Serbs, backed by Russia, have vehemently rejected the move as illegal. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera.
Let's bring you up to date now on a developing story here on Al Jazeera. A suicide bomber has struck in the Iraqi city of Karbala. Dozens are reported to have been killed and injured. The situation is very fluid at the moment, so let's get the latest now from our correspondent in Baghdad, James Bays. James, just bring us up to speed on what's going on in Karbala.
Well, so it's, as you say, very confused figures at this stage. We've spoken to different people and they've told us different things. A police source telling us that 36 people have been killed, 50 injured, but a journalist at the scene putting the figures higher than that, saying 42 people killed and 57 injured in Karbala. Now, this took place in the very centre of the city that is the most holy city in Shia Islam, and it was close to the shrine of Imam Hussein in the centre of Karbala, which is a place that pilgrims flock to all year round, and there were a lot of people gathered there trying to make their way to the shrine. And as we understand it, it was close to the area where they searched the women who were going in, and we understand the initial reports say this was the work of a female suicide bomber who set off her explosives as she was coming towards that security checkpoint to be checked as she made her way into the shrine. Of course, female suicide bombers have been used quite a few times recently, in recent months here in Iraq.
Well, I know you'll bring us up to speed with more information as that comes in, but is there any connection, James, between this suicide attack and the arrival of 2 senior US politicians into Iraq on Monday?
I don't know if there's a connection, but certainly this did happen on the day that the Vice President Dick Cheney came, and also the day that Senator John McCain came in on a Senate visit, official Senate business. But clearly he is such a key figure at the moment, being the presumptive Republican nominee for president. And I have to tell you, the violence in Kabul wasn't the only violence we had today. There have been bombs in Baghdad that have killed 4 people, and in the last few minutes we're getting reports of a mortar attack on a football field in eastern Baghdad. 5 people killed there, 7 injured. Despite this recent violence, though, the Vice President was in very upbeat mood when he spoke to reporters. He said there'd been a remarkable turnaround in Iraq in recent months. He said that the American invasion, which the 5-year anniversary comes up in just a few days' time, was a successful endeavour that had been well worth the effort.
Well, for the moment, James, I know you'll keep us up to date with what goes on there, certainly with those current incidents. James Bays, our correspondent there in Baghdad. It's an hour now since a deadline passed for protesters in Tibet to give themselves in. China's warning anybody who fails to surrender will face the consequences, threatening a harsh response. But protests elsewhere are continuing, well beyond the Himalayan state's borders. From Beijing, here's Melissa Chan.
Tibet's governor warned Monday that there would be harsh treatment for protesters who refused to surrender by midnight local time. Those who did give themselves up could be treated leniently if they showed remorse and gave information to identify others involved, he said. Just what he meant by harsh treatment, he didn't say. In an unusual late-night press conference to journalists, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs also weighed in. Hundreds of security personnel are on the streets of Lhasa. They are taking no chances when it comes to a renewed flare-up of the violence that has rocked the capital. The historic city, the center of Tibetan Buddhism, is in lockdown. The Chinese authorities say they have exercised, quote, massive restraint in quelling the riots and have not used lethal force. The governor put the death toll at 13, he described as innocent civilians. Tibetan exile groups say as many as 80 people have been killed in the crackdown. In China, Qinghai, Gansu, and Sichuan provinces have large populations of ethnic Tibetans, and there have been flare-ups of violence. Chinese police are patrolling major cities and monasteries. It's a spread of the violence that the government fears the most. It's not just a battle for the Chinese on the ground. This is an ideological issue. For the Chinese government, there's no question Tibet is a territory of China.
They describe our handling of the violence that harms people's life, security and social order as a crackdown on peaceful protests. It's groundless. No democratic country in the world will tolerate this kind of crime.
While the Chinese government hasn't admitted it publicly, the big worry is clearly the Olympic Games in just 5 months' time. Will the Tibet issue overshadow China's hosting of the Games? Originally providing a non-committal response, the head of the International Olympic Committee is now saying he is very concerned about the situation, while Russia has come out to firmly back China's handling of the affair. Meanwhile, protests from Tibet sympathizers continue. These pictures are from nearby Nepal, but around the world, the same emotions for the followers of the Dalai Lama. After some initial reluctance, the world is starting to weigh in on the issue. Melissa Chan, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
It's turning into another turbulent day on Wall Street, and one that has implications for the rest of the world. US stock markets have fallen in early trading as the news of a major banking collapse settled in. It's fueling fears of an economic meltdown of global proportions. But George Bush says he's got it all under control. John Terrett has the details.
Stocks opened sharply lower at the New York Stock Exchange on Monday, partly in sympathy for one of Wall Street's most glamorous names, Bear Stearns, bought out by a rival for a pittance. On Thursday, 85-year-old Bear Stearns was the fifth biggest investment bank here, but faced with huge losses caused by the subprime mortgage crisis and resulting credit crunch, Bears simply ran out of money. The authorities stepped in with a rescue plan, and now Bear Stearns is no more. Bought by rival JP Morgan Chase for $2 a share, the same shares that had been worth over $170 just 2 months ago. And rumours persist that Bear Stearns won't be the last US investment bank to go under.
I think the fear in the market is that we will see other players on Wall Street suffering. The names being talked about, of course, are the likes of Lehman Brothers and maybe from a banking perspective, maybe Merrill Lynch. But I mean, I think that this is obviously all speculation. But it's fair to say that anyone that has a similar business model to that of Bear Stearns, and Lehman Brothers is the most obvious candidate, they are likely struggling as well.
News of the end of Bear Stearns as a standalone company came as the US central bank, the Federal Reserve, cut a key interest rate. It took the discount rate, that's the rate that banks lend to one another, down from 3.5% to 3.25%.
You go through a period like this, that policymakers need to balance various consequences, and the right decision here, I'm convinced, was the decision that the Fed made, which was to do things, work with market participants to minimize the disruptions.
At the White House, President Bush moved to support the weak dollar, which has been trading at multi